Highguard. Yes, I've made a couple videos about it. I figured I should at least follow up. Launched earlier this week with initially 97,000 players on Steam. Gaming journalists, called it polished with strategic depth. And then influencers had some early access and decided to praise the gunplay. But did any of that matter? No, because 80% of the players 4 days later were gone. Even more have dropped off. They have mostly negative reviews, and here's the twist. Yesterday, Wildlight Entertainment did actually something interesting. They did what almost no AAA studio would do. They shipped a 5v5 mode, the community's #1 request, in just 4 days. 4 days later, from a launch disaster to shipping this kind of big fix. So the question at this point, I don't think is whether or not Highguard is Concord 2.0, but more of a question around, can a development team that actually listens save a game that is aggressively mid and generic and had such a catastrophic launch? So let's take a look at what actually happened and see if they have a chance at making it. So January 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, Highguard goes live globally. Free-to-play hero shooter, cross-platform, made by ex-Titanfall and Apex Legends developers. Within the first hour, the game hit 97,249 concurrent players on Steam, landing the platform's top 10 most played games. That is no small feat, guys. But here's some interesting little hiccups they had. Players couldn't actually get in. They had login queues stretched well past 30 minutes. The tutorial kept disconnecting people and then kicking them back to the main menu. And then when people finally could get into matches, the game ran like absolute garbage, even on high-end hardware. By the end of day one, that over 97,000 player number just tanked and ended up with over 16,000 Steam reviews, with just 28% of them being positive, which meant it was officially rated as mostly negative. And by day 4, they had less than 20,000 concurrent players, with an 80% collapse in less than a week. But we do need to understand why players left. The technical issues, first off, were everywhere. You can see this listed in many of the reviews. It's not review bombing to leave a negative review because you have an RTX 5080 or a Ryzen 7 or both, and you're literally unable to play the game and you can't maintain 90 FPS. And of course, like, I'm going to review that poorly. I shouldn't have issues playing your game with those hardware specs. But bizarrely, some mid-range systems ran fine. Like, performance just seemed to be wildly inconsistent. And like, worse, the graphics settings seemed to be fundamentally broken. Like, your render resolution was tied to post-processing quality. So if you lowered post-processing to boost FPS, the game would render at a lower resolution and then upscale it, which was making everything blurry. And even worse, motion blur was forced on with no way to disable it. I hate motion blur. It makes me car sick or like motion sick or whatever. I have to be able to turn it off. So this would have just been a no-no for me. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Also, if you aren't on the NVIDIA card, you seem to be stuck with just insanely terrible upscaling because there was no AMD FSR or Intel XeSS support, which is just insanely idiotic. There's more than one graphics card out there, guys. Come on. Like, it just seemed to be classic Unreal Engine 5 at the end of the day. It looks gorgeous if aggressively mid and generic, right? But in demos, it would run and appear to be smooth and have no major issues, but then runs like garbage when real players get it. Can't we learn from this already? Why do people keep falling into all these mistakes? I mean, let's be real, they fell into every single bad launch trope you could have and then some. It's just a nightmare. How can we not plan for this? You'd think they would sit down and be like, hey, we know exactly what problems people see on day one, let's make sure we launch with none of those, because we can plan for it now. You might encounter new issues, but at least you can be like, hey, we didn't launch with the typical expected issues, right? I don't get it. Anyway, even if performance ended up being perfect out of the gate, there was the biggest problem here, which is the core design of the game didn't work. Because here is the #1 complaint across the Steam reviews. For example, this one says, the map is the size of Latvia, but you only have 3 players. Yes, the 3v3, surprise, surprise, didn't work when you have ginormous maps. It just didn't work for people. Ultimately, the game claimed to have 2 phases. First was a looting phase where teams of 3 would ride horses across these massive maps, gathering weapons and armor. There were no NPCs, no AI enemies, just you and your teammates riding around for literal minutes, hoping to run into the enemy team. Then if you find the Shieldbreaker sword, you get into the raid phase where you're actually able to fight. One Steam reviewer actually put it perfectly, saying they've poached systems from games that work well within those games, but then shoved together just don't make sense at all. Sounds about right. So you're told it's fast paced, but then you have to stop mid-match to mine resources. This doesn't fit. Maybe if you made this game and then decided it was like a tower defense game, I don't know what they were trying to do. To be honest, I think it makes perfect sense. They took a bunch of things and mashed it together, and they tried something. Props for trying something, but it appears to have not worked. On top of that, the spatial audio appeared to have been broken, so you can't actually tell where the enemies are, and that's going to be a problem in a game like this. The way the audio was working is there were reports of people thought there were other enemy players on top of them and like inside mountains. It got really weird. Also, there was only 1 game mode, and matches could last anywhere from 10 to 40 minutes, and you never actually know until it's done, right? So then you've already committed to a match and you don't know how long it's going to last. And, you know, if you're more of a casual player who has limited time to be able to hop into a game to play with your buddies, that might not work for you. It just seemed to be death by 1,000 cuts. Like, every system appears to just have rough edges. Every piece of the technology in this game has some sort of bug, and every creative decision in this game just appeared to be a miss. When you had all that up, people just left. I mean, I didn't even want to play it, to be honest. I didn't want to have to change BIOS settings just to be able to launch a game. That just seemed like a headache. So maybe I'll change my mind. I don't know. Now here's where this gets interesting, because while the overwhelming loss of players uninstalling the game appeared to be one side of the story, the gaming outlets decided to tell a very different story, because of course they did. GameStop, for example, called Highguard a game with strategic depth and distinctive match flow. Gaming Trend said they were profoundly stunned at how much fun there is to be found in Highguard. Kotaku praised its intuitive gameplay loop, responsive gunplay, and polished presentation. Meanwhile, actual players in Steam reviews were saying things like boring, confusing, nothing clicks, maps too big, performance disaster, blah, 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 right? We have seen this pattern before. Concord got 7 out of 10 from IGN, 3 out of 5 from Eurogamer, then shut down 2 weeks later, and Sony lost millions of dollars. Suicide Squad got praise from critics for its combat systems, and then lost Warner Brothers $200 million and had support ended after less than a year. Anthem got, 6.5 out of 10, and the critics were calling it exhilarating, and users called it a repetitive, boring mess. And we know how that ended. So I was actually talking to my husband about this. So whenever I see the very overly glazy headlines or reviews from gaming journalists, I immediately think, oh shit, this game must be really, really bad for them to be running defense like this. Like, how bad is this game? Gaming journalists, we all know it at this point, right? There's hundreds of videos talking about it, hundreds of just influencers in general talking about this. The gaming journalists get preview access in controlled environments, often with developers in the room. They write positive or cautiously optimistic pieces to maintain the access for future coverage. And then the game launches to real players and it's a disaster. Guess what? We've caught on. We don't trust the journalists anymore. We trust the numbers and we trust user reviews and we trust our friends who have actually played the game. So yes, Highguard is following the exact same pattern as games like Concord. Same terrible first impressions, same journalist praise versus player rejection, and the same catastrophic player drop-off. But here is where the story actually changes. On January 30th, 4 days after launch, Wildlight Entertainment announced a 5v5 raid mode, saying, "You asked and we listened." The #1 complaint across thousands of reviews was that the maps were too big for 3v3, and players begged for 5v5 or 6v6. You know, more players, more action, more frequent encounters, and less riding around the empty maps. Wildlight heard the feedback, and by Thursday they had coded it and decided to launch it. Like, is it going to be perfect? Probably not. It's most likely a beta, and they have said that it's temporary, but if it is received well, if it's something that they're able to work on, it would most likely stay, right? But let me put this into perspective here for you. When a major AAA game launches with problems, the typical response is something along the lines of, "We hear your feedback," followed by, if you're lucky, a roadmap showing fixes coming in 3 to 6 months. I mean, just look at Monster Hunter Wilds as an example. There has been complaint after complaint after complaint relating to optimization of this game being so poor. And we're what, over a year later, and they just released a patch fixing a majority of these problems. Like, what are we doing here? And in comparison, you look at Wildlight shipping the most requested feature in less than a week. And the update also added a new base called Soulwell and included performance optimizations. And this came on top of patch 1.0.4 from 2 days earlier, where they had added things like FOV sliders, added the motion blur toggle that should have been in there at launch, and then claimed a 90% reduction in crashes. So 2 major patches, 1 weekend addressing the biggest complaints. 2 major patches addressing some of the biggest complaints, and the community response was actually positive. One highly upvoted Steam comment says, "I believe I speak on behalf of the majority when I say we are proud of you for taking the time to listen to the community to quickly bring quality of life fixes and bringing required changes such as 5v5 mode." And it is currently working, guys. The Steam review score has climbed from mostly negative to mixed, hitting 41% positive in English reviews. So what do we learn from this here, guys? This is how you should respond to a disaster launch. Now, you should work really hard to not have a disastrous launch, and we'll touch on that in a minute. But you should not be responding with things like roadmaps and promises, not with "we're looking into it." You need to actually fix the problems and fix them quickly. This is the fundamental difference with Highguard and something like Concord. Now, Highguard is independent. Concord had Sony, but they didn't even try to fix the problems. Whether or not they could have been fixed is a completely different thing, but like, they didn't even try, right? They just pulled the plug. At least Wildlight is fighting for their game to succeed. The hard question is going to be, is it enough? The 5v5 mode does fix the biggest complaint. Maps will feel more populated, encounters can happen more frequently, the looting phase might not be as boring, and it does address what players are screaming about. Doesn't fix everything. Obviously, there's, you know, reports of balancing issues, of it still just feeling like it's more coded to be 3v3. It also, like, performance is actually worse with Like, for example, performance is actually worse with more players on screen. And the fundamental question still remains, why play this instead of Apex Legends or Overwatch 2 or Marvel Rivals? And crucially, it doesn't bring back the massive amount of players who already left. Because guess what? Those people have already uninstalled other games. One skeptical Steam comment actually captures this, saying approximately 95% of players have dropped the game in only 4 days. Rarely do you see a drop that hard. Adding a 5v5 mode is not going to be enough. And yeah, he has a point, guys, because here is the reality here. This is a free-to-play game with cross-platform made by ex-Apex Legends developers. And it can't keep 10,000 people playing 4 days after launch. Team Fortress 2, a game from 2007, has more concurrent players right now. First impressions are forever in gaming, and new players researching Highguard will find launch disaster videos. They'll see the mostly negative reviews from day one. The narrative is already written, and that's even if they were interested in playing the game in the first place. It still doesn't ignore the fact that it looks very derivative, very generic, and nothing special about it. So if that didn't already turn you off, you are now seeing all of these problems related to the game. The narrative is basically already written. You can patch bugs, you can add features, you can optimize performance, but you really can't patch catastrophic first impressions. Wildlight even has a roadmap. They are going in episodes, right? This was episode 1. Episode 2 launches in February with a new warden, a new map, and ranked mode. They're promising things like bi-monthly updates through 2026. But roadmaps don't save games. Concord had a roadmap. Sony shut it down anyway. Anthem had a roadmap for Anthem 2.0, and EA canceled it when the players left. Babylon's Fall, Gundam Evolution, Knockout City all had roadmaps and are all dead. Suicide Squad killed. The Justice League did ultimately release their content because it looks like a lot of it was already kind of in the works, but it was like done, right? The live service graveyard is full to the brim of ambitious plans that never got completed because the players were already gone. The fixes came too late. The vision just didn't jive with the players, and they couldn't give them the reason to swap from what they were already playing. It's an oversaturated market, therefore the graveyard is going to be oversaturated as well, right? So what actually happens to Highguard? There's a couple of different scenarios here, at least that I can see. Best case scenario, Wildlight keeps this aggressive, community-focused approach going, and this makes the 5v5 permanent. The ranked mode is somehow excellent, the performance keeps improving, and the game stabilizes somewhere around 10 to 15,000 concurrent players. Not a massive hit by any means, but sustainable for a smaller live service game, and it becomes some form of a cult classic with a dedicated community that genuinely loves it. And the developers even said they do not need a large player base in order to keep this game running. What is their definition of not large player base? We don't know yet. I know when you look at games like Helldivers 2, this is kind of where Helldivers 2 day-to-day falls in. And then you'll see the huge jump in players when they have the big content releases, right? And I love me my Helldivers 2, and they did release Broken, but with Helldivers 2, it was a very unique game, and Helldivers 2 kind of, I think, handled it better by saying, hey, we really weren't expecting this many players to be interested in the game, and that's why our servers are crashing. So we welcome you to play other games while we get this fixed. But because you had so much hype around the game already and people really, really wanted to play it, they were willing to wait until the fixes were there, right? You don't even have that with Highguard. You don't see a lot of cultural relevancy around the game for people to be like, yeah, I'll hold back and wait because it looks like so much fun. So we'll see. Next scenario is, I think the worst case scenario is that the player count just keeps bleeding despite all of these improvements. By summer, we're probably going to be at something like 3,000 to 5,000 concurrent players. Updates will slow down. In late 2026, they'll announce like seasonal content drops, which is code for winding down active development. And then the servers will limp along until probably a 2027 shutdown. And then I'll make a movie about it, and that'll be a lot of fun. But I think most likely, especially given their comments about not needing a huge player base, I think they'll probably end up somewhere in between. I think the game will probably find a niche audience of like maybe 6,000, high-end 10,000, just really dedicated players that love and support the game. It doesn't thrive by any means, but it doesn't just die, and it kind of just exists in that middle space. Not the next big thing, but not quite another Concord, just sort of there, which again is fine, but is it Jeff Keighley hype level worthy? Probably not. The fundamental difference here, though, is that Wildlight is actually trying, and they're listening, they're adapting, they're moving faster than most AAA studios would dream of, which again is why it's good that they're independent. And I do feel that that earns respect. And I think if you were somebody that liked the idea of the game, or, you know, just there were certain things about it that just bugged you, like performance issues or that 3v3, I think it does earn a second chance from those types of players to give it another shot and see if it jives with them. But sadly, at the end of the day, respecting your players doesn't pay for live service development. Player numbers do, and players willing to pay into things like your cosmetics and battle passes. Servers cost money, guys. Development costs money, guys. So are the player numbers high enough? I don't know. They're still pretty dangerously low right now. So like, final thoughts here. I do think Wildlight deserves genuine credit because they did ship the community's most requested feature. They did push out some major patches in the first week to fix crashes and adding the toggles that should have always been there and addressing performance issues. So this is exemplary post-launch, but shouldn't have had to have been done, even though most studios would not have taken it this seriously, would not have pushed these fixes this quickly. And again, to their credit, it's working in some degree. Reviews have been trending more upward. It's now got an overall more mixed review. Players are appearing to give the game a second look, not in droves by any stretch of the imagination, but the numbers are going up a little bit. And the community is actually praising the developers instead of just dunking on them. Whether or not they're going back to play it is completely different. Here's the hard truth. Like I said, caring just isn't enough. The launch was a complete and total disaster. Unacceptable. And it deserved the player drop that it got. And in 4 days, yeah, the performance issues across the board, the map's too big for the player count, single game mode, like these are all problems that should have been caught before launch, or at least in a proper beta test, which I think is where this game should be right now. It should be in beta or some form of early access. They needed to do more of that before an official release. And I think they would have gotten a lot more grace, even with the placement in the Game Awards. If it would have been like, hey, we're excited, like if Jeff Keighley would have said, I'm really excited about what this game is trying to be. I've played it. Yeah, it's a little rough, but it's going to be going into beta soon. I think that would have been completely different, and they would have been able to take all of this community feedback that clearly they care about and address it from the perspective of a beta, right? Like we're a lot more forgiving when we know something is in beta or early access because they are even acknowledging that it's not perfect. But when you have a V1 release, you are kind of stamping that you've done all this testing and done all this research and already are confident that it's good to go, and then it's not. Like, this is a problem. This needs to stop. People need to stop doing this. But is Highguard Concord 2? I mean, yes and no. I don't think they would have even come close to doing what Wildlight is doing, and they're fighting for their game and they're listening and they're shipping fixes at a pace that just puts the AAA industry to shame, proving that this can be done, and it's just fundamentally different than what we typically see, but different doesn't always mean successful. The end result might still be the same, a game that dies, but instead of Concord, it will die probably more slowly instead of quickly, and it will be analyzed by people for years to come because so much of this just doesn't work. And much like Concord, it feels derivative, it looks uninspired, and even the animation style looks very similar. Yes, one is sci-fi-ish and one's more fantasy-ish, but I don't know how to explain it. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, it still looks similar. So I get the Concord, and then like if it really sucks, it just turns me off of the whole genre. Like, is that really the game to start with? But also, if it is gonna be gone in a few months, like I didn't get to play Concord, I don't know. Like, I'm so torn on this. Anyway, don't lie to yourself about the situation because the numbers don't lie. If you liked the game, the reality, the data, it's not looking good, guys. I do genuinely hope they turn this around and that they can find a niche that works, because I want developers that behave this way to be rewarded, but it doesn't change if their product isn't appealing to people. The 5v5 response does show willingness to listen and move fast. Can they some of the other issues through things like cosmetics or map releases? I don't know. Time will tell, but this is exactly the kind of developer attitude that the industry does need more of. So I don't know, guys. Hope doesn't pay server bills. So player numbers do, and right now those player numbers are so dangerously low. And just because you like what the developers are trying to do, if they can't give you a good product, doesn't mean that they should just be propped up, right? So much is wrong with Highguard, but we can still give props at least to Wildlight and their attempt to fix these issues. Again, should have been a beta, should have had more focused testing, and they wouldn't be in this position that they are in now. But let me know in the comments, have you tried the 5v5 mode? Did that change your opinion of the game? Are you just so out of it, you just don't care anymore? It doesn't matter what they do. You hated the game that much. Nothing is going to bring you back to try it again. If you're someone that could be enticed to come back and try it again, what would you want to see? Do you think I should play Highguard, or should I try a different hero shooter as like my first hero shooter? And if so, what would you recommend for somebody like me who is a noob in this space and doesn't like overly sweaty things? If you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear in the comments below. And do you think that a dev team that actually listens can save a game from a catastrophic launch, or is this just a much slower death than Concord, but ultimately a death and a Concord 2? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, that's all I have got for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and peace out. Bye.